This is General Election 2019. This is part of a series of in-depth interviews we are doing with Christians standing in this year's general election from the major political parties. And this will determine on Thursday, the 12th of December, which government will be in power. And in today's programme, I'm interviewing William Nigel Jones, who is a Liberal Democratic candidate for the Lib Dems. You like to be called Nigel, so I'll introduce you as Nigel. Nigel, it's a pleasure to have you on this programme.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
You came to faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. And why is politics important to you?
I was brought up in a Christian family, but the turning point for me really was when I got baptised as a teenager in a Baptist chapel in South Wales. And one of the things I'll never forget is the sense I had then of a removal of a basic fear. You know, I still get frightened if unexpected things happen, but that's a biological reaction. The assurance of God's love has removed from my life any sense of fundamental fear.
For most of your life, you've been a teacher. So why have you suddenly decided that well, not suddenly, over the last decade, decided to get involved in frontline politics?
Well, I've always taken some interest in politics, partly because my parents always did, although they weren't actually active in any particular political party. But then when I started my first job, I started considering joining a political party. And although I came from a very Labour-dominated area, I felt that I wanted to be involved in doing something for the less well-off, the poor, the vulnerable in society and so on, and felt that our society and government weren't doing enough. But at the same time, I didn't want to be part of an organisation that believed too much in state control of people's lives. So that's, I think, the basic reason why I chose the Liberal Democrats, or Liberals as it was called then.
And what is it like to actually be an active member of the Liberal Democrats, and what is it about their policies that have attracted you?
I think it's that, as I've learned over many recent years, their policies are always centred around the care for individual people, rather than starting with the state. It's the care for individual people that is usually put at the centre of all their policies. And that's been one of the reasons that's confirmed me to become more and more active within the party.
Nigel, you're standing as a candidate in the constituency of Newcastle Underline in Staffordshire. What are the issues you're campaigning on in your constituency?
Well, one of the fundamental issues is that we are standing for remaining in the European Union because we believe that's the best, not only economically, and all the figures seem to suggest that is the case, but also because of through that we have more influence around the world in current circumstances to stand up against countries like the USA, China, Russia even, and maybe other countries like Brazil, when they overcome their problems, will become very dominant as well. And it seems to me that, contrary to what it was 100 years ago, we can't stand in that arena and expect to influence the world much on our own. We need to be in with a much bigger bloc. And Europe are our nearest neighbours, and seem the obvious. So that's one. In spite of the fact that the constituency voted 62% to leave, given the other parties and the other candidates and the way in which they're behaving, I'm very glad I've got involved because I am now the only voice of Remain in this election campaign. And
we're living in a time when it's becoming increasingly difficult for Bible-believing Christians to be involved in frontline politics. Many have sadly been purged from the major political parties, and we find that Christians as well are generally being kind of marginalised by mainstream society. What are your thoughts on this issue, and how would the Liberal Democrats protect Christian freedoms?
Well, I'm not sure I agree with one of the things you said there about Christians being purged from parties. It's certainly not happening within the Liberal Democrats. For example, the Liberal Democrat Christian Forum is now one of the biggest sub-organisations, and we have recently had party vote at a conference to approve us as an organisation to have a bigger influence on what goes on in the party. So that suggests quite the opposite to what you just said. And I found myself, I've stood 3 times for parliamentary elections, and each time when I put a little bit in my literature in the election campaign about myself, I always include that I'm a Methodist local preacher. And absolutely nobody in the political arena in our party has ever objected to me putting that in. So I'm a little puzzled as to why you put that. I know within our country, of course, Christians are being more and more sidelined or not taken as much notice of as we used to be. But I don't see a purge. And I found my Christian beliefs linking very much, as I said earlier, with the Liberal Democrats' core basis for all its policy making of putting care for the individual human being and breaking down tribal and other barriers between peoples. And that, to me, is a fundamental part of what it means to be a Christian.
I have to discuss what happened to your leader of the last general election back in 2017, Tim Farron, who was your party leader, a good committed Christian, was absolutely unfairly hounded by the mainstream media. But I have to ask the question, can you be a Christian and a Liberal after what happened to Tim Farron?
Oh, yes. And, well, Tim Farron still is a Christian and a Liberal, and he's still very, very active in the party. For him, it was a decision that he made personally because he felt uncomfortable in the leadership role because of certain issues. But you say, yes, that he was put under pressure and hounded very, very unfairly, I agree with you, by the media. But there was no hounding from the party whatsoever. And in fact, quite a number of people in the party were a bit disappointed when he stood down. So I'm absolutely convinced, more than ever now than when I first joined, that there's actually not just a place for Christians in the Liberal Democrats, but a link between the general approach of the Liberal Democrats to public policy and how society should operate and Christian belief.
One issue that has really dominated this year's general election has been the issue of anti-Semitism or Jew hatred, Nigel, to the extent that we've even seen the chief rabbi make an intervention by saying that the soul of the nation is at stake and that Jeremy Corbyn himself is complicit in prejudice and is not fit for office. We have the Jewish community who are very scared and very anxious. What are your thoughts on this issue and what are the Liberal Democrats doing to reassure our Jewish community?
Well, I was a little stunned by the extreme view expressed by the chief rabbi. I think he was perfectly right, even within a general election campaign, to point out that the Jewish community, and it's not only the Jewish community, by the way, but lots of other people, are really, really concerned that Jeremy Corbyn has not done enough to root out anti-Semitism from the Labour Party. And on that point needed to be heard. But I think he went over the top when he started saying we shouldn't be Prime Minister and things of that kind. I think that was just a little bit a step too far to interfere in the politics of what's going on. As far as Liberal Democrats are concerned, we removed a candidate in the 2017 election, David Ward from the north of England, because he made what were rather anti-Semitic remarks. So he was removed immediately. And I think that by that we set a good example, that that's what should happen when people say things, because politicians do have to be so very, very careful what they say in public. Even if what they say they believe to be reasonable, it can be so easily unreasonably interpreted by the public and cause a lot of dangerous harm. And I think I also feel that we as a party are prepared to stamp on things like that fairly rapidly, and certain other things too. People sometimes think that because you're liberal, you're libertarian, anything goes. And that's quite the opposite. Yes, we may have a rather wider range of tolerance than either the Tories or the Labours and other groups of people in our society. But in spite of that wide range of tolerance, if we find somebody doing something that we think is completely wrong, we stamp down on it pretty quickly and firmly.
The other issue that is really dominating our headlines is the issue of Brexit that has really kind of divided the nation. And the Lib Dems have promised that they will revoke Article 50 to ensure that Britain remains in the EU and support a second referendum. But isn't this position damaging for democracy as it totally politically disenfranchises the majority who voted to leave in the referendum in 2000?
The leadership of the party took the stand about revoking Article 50 as a means of trying to impress how strongly we believe we should remain in the EU. And by the way, it does say only if we got a massive majority to be in government, which clearly we're not going to get, and nobody really thought we would ever anyway. And unfortunately, that has been a bit of a distraction. And we are now in the place where I'm happiest with saying that we want a second referendum, because that is the democratic way of doing it. We believe that the case and situation has changed over the last 3 years enough for there to be an opportunity for people who believe in Remain to put forward that case again and persuade people. If we don't persuade people, then so be it. So we're not disenfranchising anybody. In fact, we're saying we're going to give you another opportunity to vote.
In your manifesto, the Liberal Democrats have pledged to legalise cannabis, very much like the US and Canada, by permitting the sale of drugs through licensed shops. Surely this will add to the problem we have in our nation with mental health, especially young men, and lead to greater social misbehaviour. What is the Lib Dems thinking on this policy?
There are risks with all drugs, including alcohol, by the way, which is so freely available and perhaps is not controlled quite as much as I would like to see it controlled. And it's a way of finding the best management of these risks for people. And a lot of evidence from the USA and Canada in particular is showing that in our case, because it's criminalised, it puts it more in the hands of the drug barons and so on, and also wastes an awful lot of police time. And the whole situation now in that, and some of the other drugs too at the moment, is such a mess. I think it's time to consider an alternative approach. Now, I have a little bit of a question mark myself, because will it work? Well, we are a party that claims more than any other to base our policy on evidence. So if evidence were to show that it's not working that way, then I would be quite happy to revert to what we've got at the moment. But as I say, at the moment, it's not working very well for people anyway. So I think there's a good case for experimenting with something different. As I say, it's all about managing the risks.
The Liberal Democrats deserve a lot of credit for the last coalition government when you came into power, the Conservative Party, where you put the national interest before party interest, and in a sense to just deal with the economy, which was in a complete mess after Labour's mismanagement of it. Now, according to your plans, that you say that the economy will expand and there will be a 50 billion Remain bonus from remaining in the European Union. Where does this come from? Particularly if we consider that Britain is the second largest contributor to the European Union, and yet it gets one of the least amount of money back from.
Well, that 50 billion bonus is a conservative estimate from all the various expert organisations like the Institute of Fiscal Studies, Office of Budget Responsibility, the National, what do they call themselves, for Economic and Social Research, who have actually said the benefit will be even more than that. So we've made that a conservative, and it is in addition to any contribution that we make. So in a sense, you could look at it as a profit from our alliance with the EU. So what we pay to them doesn't come into this at all. So that's where that comes from, compared to leaving, even under a reasonable deal. And the Office of Budget Responsibility has actually said if we left without a deal at all, which is still possible if Boris Johnson's back in power, then unfortunately, according to them, we would suffer a drop in government income by £30 billion every year. So that over the 5-year period is 150 billion, 3 times as much. In if we had a no-deal Brexit. So I think we are being extremely fair in making that statement because it's based on evidence. As far as the past is concerned and what we did in coalition, I supported us going into that coalition and supported, as most Lib Dems, not all, but most Lib Dems did, that the government's deficit had to be brought down, that was the #1 priority for a couple of years. As the coalition went on, though, I personally and many other Lib Dems became very unhappy about the fact that the government was being too harsh and that people on our side weren't pushing enough. But inevitably, it's a power struggle. We were the minor party after all, so there's a limit to what we could have done eventually. And we did a lot of good. One other little thing I would say, mismanagement of the Labour, in fact, I think that it was exaggerated a little bit. And after all, it was the Labour government that dealt with the bank crisis. And it was a banking crisis, not a government crisis, that led to all that recession. And I thought they handled that very well in dealing with it speedily. But then when we got into government, one of our ministers said there was a note on the table, no money left. So in other words, the Labour Party had not prepared for any possible crisis, even although when it happened, they dealt with it very well.
Also, when it comes to general elections, Nigel, leaders play a major part in determining how people will vote come polling day. So what is it in terms of the characteristics and the attributes that your leader has, Jo Swinton, have that people would actually vote for her and maybe become the next Prime Minister in a surprise election? Have you got?
Well, I think she's a very determined young lady, and she's young and perhaps a little bit inexperienced in some respects, but she's got this ability to stand up for what she believes in. And although she will listen to lots of people and sometimes amend her views according, in fact, she's changed her views on a number of things since she was in the coalition, which is good. I think all people in positions of power need to have that flexibility, but she has got that strength. Once she decides this is what needs doing, she's not afraid to go ahead and say, this must be done, even if lots of other people still attack her for saying so.
Also, onto an issue that's very close to your heart, and that's the issue of education, Nigel. So in the Lib Dem, in your manifesto, you announced you plan to spend more than 10 billion on schools and hire more than 20,000 teachers by the end of the next Parliament. How important is education to Liberal Democrats and your vision?
Oh, very, very important. We know that at elections, quite often, education isn't the #1 priority in voters' minds. But for us as a party, it often is the #1, because based around this core value about the care for each individual, and particularly for children as they grow up, education is seen to be such a major factor. And by that, we don't just mean learning knowledge. We mean bringing people up with the correct means of relating to other people, human relationships, as well as believing that we shouldn't treat education as a straitjacket that people have to conform to one particular way, but look to see how what I would say God-given talents that each individual has can be developed. And that's why we put education very, very strongly. And by the way, one of the two key things that we are doing much more strongly than any other party at the moment is emphasis on childcare and the early years, because all the evidence for over 30 years has shown what a big influence those first few years of a child's life has on their ability to succeed and have a good life later on. But on the other side as well that we're emphasising is the need to give more skills to adults. We have a skills deficit. The Department for Education has produced statistics recently showing this, and it's affecting not only people's quality of life and quality of jobs, it's affecting the productivity, which is a major concern in the way in which business operates at the moment. So we would, as you may know, there's a sort of £10,000 wallet, it's called, of money, which would be given to adults 25, I think 40 and 55 years of age, with careers advice free to go with that, to enable them to reskill. And that has become even more important than ever, because we now know we live in a world where jobs are likely to change even more rapidly than they have in the last 20 years. So people need that opportunity to change and improve their skills.
The issue of the family is an issue that's very important for our viewers. What plans do the Liberal Democrats have in place to actually protect the family and Christian values?
Well, £1 billion, we say, should be spent on child centres again, to revive them, because they've suffered so much. And that, again, is so important to families. Another is giving local authorities a lot more resources to do certain things in public services locally. One of the difficulties that I personally feel very strongly about this is that our government is too centralised. It's too much dependent on people in Whitehall. Even after the politicians have made their decisions, so much depends on people in Whitehall implementing the regulations and rules and laws. And very often they have no understanding about the local situation. That's where local authorities have a key part to play, so that social services of various kinds and youth services are provided by local authorities to suit local people's needs, where families who are finding life difficult can get the advice and support that they need. And at the moment, too many of them are not. And that's undermining family life and leading to all sorts of problems. People have often said even breakups of marriage sometimes can be caused simply because of financial problems. So, this has a big part to play in enabling families to stick together and to be supported. And after all, just a husband and wife and children trying to do everything on their own doesn't work. They need support from their communities.
So sadly, we've seen that the issue of terrorism has become another issue in this general election after the tragic events that took place last week on London Bridge. What policies do the Liberal Democrats have in place to protect our streets and confront the threat of terrorism?
Well, related to what I was just saying, one of the things is to not just say 20,000 new police. I think we've put the figure at a little bit more than that, but that these police should be in their local communities. At the moment, the impression I get is that there's a really strong anti-terrorism police force in this country who are doing a good job. So, but they need further help with community policing, and that I think is a key issue for identifying possible difficulties that certain people might present before they actually get as far as having to committing the crimes that they commit. But I think the other thing too relates also to the local communities themselves. There have been some instances where Muslims, for example, have got together with Christians and other people in their communities to try to develop a means that certainly inhibits any individual who wants to commit a terrorist act or might be radicalised, as they say, to regard people they disagree with as enemies. And that, again, is another cultural and educational thing about helping those people who have moderate views to have big influence, so that we prevent, as far as possible, those other individuals from regarding their fellows as enemies.
Sadly, we see huge amounts of Christian persecution in the Middle East, particularly as Christians are being ethnically cleansed from the birthplace of Christianity. What policies does your party have in place to actually protect Christians facing persecution for their faith?
Well, first of all, we as a party have always been very strong, and our current manifesto is still strong in spite of what's been achieved so far on anti-discrimination laws. That's one thing within our own country, but also both within our own country and across the world. I'm very pleased to say that our manifesto states very clearly we in government would appoint an ambassador for freedom of belief, who would have the remit right across in all foreign affairs to look out for opportunities to to prevent discrimination against people just because of their beliefs, but also where discrimination happens, to try to work through international agencies, the UN, for example, to ensure they get the protections that they need. And likewise, in our own country, we have a policy now established to say we would fund churches where necessary in our own country for security measures if they are fearful about certain others in their own local communities.
And one issue that's very important to myself and also to our viewers is the issue of Israel. What is your party's position on Israel?
We have, well, the two key things are we still believe in the two-state solution. We believe that although it must still be made clear that Israel's invasions into other lands around Palestine is illegal, we would see encouragement and opportunity in a peace process for the two sides to get together and bargain as to which patches of land they want. Because I think we've gone so far down this road now, it looks almost impossible to reverse things to as they were before the 1967 war. But if we could get the two sides to come to some arrangement of bargaining over which patches of land they're going to have, then that two-state solution could still work. And I think another thing that I think governments could well do more to help them in this process is listen to the Palestinian Christians. I've been reading some books over recent years, and I'm quite impressed with what I've read of what the Christians in that neck of the woods have to say about the relationships between the Israelis and the Muslims.
And unfortunately, they are facing incredible persecution from Hamas and from the Palestinian Authority themselves.
Sadly, and something needs to be done to help them.
And finally, Nigel, would you like to say a few words to our viewers as to why they should support or why they should vote for the Liberal Democrats on Thursday, the 12th of December?
I would say that you should vote Liberal Democrat if you believe, like me, that staying in the European Union is not only good for us economically, it's good for us culturally, and it's good for our influence on the world. And matters like the environment are so important, and although we can give a lead, we will be much, much more effective on that, working through an organisation like the EU. The other thing comes to dealing with inequality in our country. Inequality is a key issue, and in fact, it lies behind the attitudes that have led some people to want to leave the European Union, mistakenly. But we have not done enough to involve and help our local communities, and that's another reason why I think you should support us and support our view on providing more locally accountable public services to help people in need in our communities.
So Nigel Jones, thank you so much for joining me in this interview. And just remember, the election takes place on Thursday, the 12th of December. Vote and pray.